The subject of today's devotion is taken from the United Methodist Church website. During this Lenten season, we need to reach out in love to our neighbors and friends. We need to be patient and kind and not be self-seeking. The website contained the following story, one originally written by Soho Archon. It's the parable of the spoons. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it. One day a man said to God, "God, I would like to know what heaven and hell are like." God showed the man two doors. Inside the first one, in the middle of the room, was a large round table with a large pot of vegetable stew. It smelled delicious, and it made the man's mouth water. But the people sitting around the table were thin and sickly. They appeared to be famished. They were holding spoons with very long handles. Each of them could easily reach into the pot of stew and take a spoonful. But because the handle was longer than their arms, they could not get the spoons back into their mouths. The man shuddered at the sight of their misery and suffering. God said, "You have seen hell." Behind the second door, the room appeared exactly the same. There was a large round table with a large pot of wonderful vegetable stew that made the man's mouth water. The people had the same long-handled spoons, but they were well-nourished, laughing and talking. The man said, "I don't understand." God smiled and said, "It is simple. The answer is love. These people learned early on to share and feed one another. In the other room, all the people were greedy and only thought of themselves." When I attended Sunday school back in the 1960s, attaining joy in life was explained by what the letters of the word joy spell out. J standing for Jesus, O for others, and Y for yourself, in that order. By keeping God and others before ourselves, we receive much more than we give away. Being a Christian means accepting a responsibility to share the blessings we receive from God with others. How each of us does that will not be the same. We'll all share according to our individual abilities. What God asks of one person will be different than what he asks of someone else. So how does a person know what task or tasks God has sent them to do? By listening to his voice. Sometimes it's only a whisper. The New Testament is full of tasks God assigned to Paul. And from those examples, it's easy to conclude that God only asks us to perform obviously important work. But we should expect to get seemingly small assignments as well. It's important to keep our minds open to God's tasks, no matter how large or small. Sometimes it may be just a small task that he wants us to do. It could be anything. Perhaps just to give an encouraging word or to listen to someone. Maybe it's just to answer the phone, as long as it's not a telemarketer. I told the following story to you a couple of years ago about a task I received from God in 1995, but I didn't initially accept it as a task. I didn't recognize what it was. I was working for USAID at the time. That's the U.S. Foreign Assistance Agency under the State Department. I was a security official. One of my responsibilities was to keep up with the various incidents occurring throughout the world that might affect the safety of USAID employees who worked and lived overseas. To do so required daily reading of between 50 and 100 telegrams concerning civil unrest, political activity, instability, wars, terrorism, and significant criminal activity. Reading these every day could be very disheartening. Apparently there was no place, and I do mean no place on earth, where something bad would not or could not happen. In January 1995, one of the morning telegrams contained a report from the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. The cable briefly described an incident where gunmen in northwestern Cambodia killed an American woman and her Cambodian guide. They were on a tour van with other tourists returning from a visit to the ancient Angkor Wat temple. Cambodian officials had reported the attack was carried out by Khmer Rouge guerrillas, who kidnapped and killed at least 6 tourists the previous year. But the U.S. Embassy's assessment was that the attack was just as likely to have been by bandits. The tour van was attacked on a Sunday morning after it stopped at a roadblock more than 15 miles outside the center of the Angkor Wat complex. Unfortunately, that report was similar to dozens of others I'd read every day. About 10 days later, I walked out of my office and was passing by the desk of the director's secretary. I was on my way out to get lunch. It was 12 noon, but everybody else had already left. Neither of the two front office secretaries were present either. It was just me. I was almost to the door when the phone on the secretary's desk rang. I was inclined to ignore it. The call clearly wasn't for me, but something was telling me, or someone was telling me, to answer, so I did. In 1995, there was no caller ID, at least not on our government phones. It was just a plain, simple push-button phone. I identified myself, and the man on the other end said he was calling from Austin, Texas. He said he needed help in getting his daughter's body back from overseas. I had no idea what he was talking about, why he called our office, or how he'd even gotten our office phone number. I told him this was the security office of the Agency for International Development. No one in our unit would be able to help. We had no knowledge or expertise or resources regarding such matters. What he needed was totally outside the type of work we did, and I knew of nobody in the entire agency who could help him. So I advised him that he needed to talk to somebody at the State Department. At that moment, I could not think of what section of the State Department that might be, though. It would have been so easy to tell the man that I did not know who he should call, but to simply wish him good luck in his efforts. Then I could go to lunch. But he then added that his daughter had been killed in Cambodia near Angkor Wat. Immediately, I recalled the cable report. I had the sudden vision of what this man would have to do. He would need to make long-distance call after long-distance call, trying to find somebody in the very large U.S. Department of State bureaucracy who could help him. I put myself in his position. A citizen calling his government over 1,000 miles away for help. It was noon, and I knew he'd get a lot of answering machine messages, even if he found the right office. All I could picture was this grieving father trying to get help from the faraway State Department bureaucracy without even knowing where to begin. But I couldn't let that happen. Believing I could probably find out in a minute or two who he should call, I asked for his phone number and told him I'd call him back as soon as I could find somebody who could help. I went back to my desk, but at that moment I had no idea where to start. Suddenly it came back to me that the State Department's Office of Consular Affairs is responsible for assisting U.S. citizens. In 1995, there was no government internet or electronic database to track down a phone number, no email. All I had was an inch-thick paper State Department phone directory. When I finally found the listing for the consular office that handled South Asian matters, I called them. My earlier vision was dead on. With every number I called, I got a recorded message. Nobody seemed to be in. Every official was temporarily out or on extended travel. Their recording would refer me to another person at a different number. By the time I'd reached 6 voicemail messages, I knew I'd done the right thing by interceding on the man's behalf. At least my calls were free, and I could track down and I knew sooner or later I would track down the right person. I couldn't help but think how painful my experience would have been for that man in Texas. By the 7th number, I got a real live person. I identified myself and why I was calling. The official said she would help and would call the man. Success. I was almost ecstatic. I gave her his number. I then called the man back and gave him her name and her telephone office number. 2 phone calls. That's the only contact I had with the man. After finishing the call to him, I felt like I'd really done something worthwhile. All I did was answer a phone and make a few more calls. But for a few moments, I got to be the U.S. government to that man. I think about that event every now and then and realize it was God telling me to answer the phone. It was God who gave the man our office number and who let me remember the bus attack incident. It was God not letting me remember the Consular Affairs office as I spoke to that man. Because I couldn't think of that office then, I knew I had to do the phone calling for him. That he happened to call our office, that I happened to be standing near the desk where the call came in when no one else was around, to me, that was all God's doing. He gave me the chance to care for someone else just as I would want to be cared for. I'm thankful and grateful that I recognized and accepted that assignment, but I have no doubt missed other tasks. No doubt some of you have had similar instances where you do something and you recognize later perhaps that it's God that has told you and asked you to do something, and you feel really good afterwards. It's now been over 26 years since that event, but the feeling of having done a little something to help a stranger is priceless, as some of you may know. Lord, forgive us for being selfish, teach us how to share and care for one another. Amen.